Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode in the series Dawah Ilallah, as we go through the comparative sciences, as we try to find better and more meaningful ways to call people to submit to Allah. In this series, we've looked at many different issues facing the da'i, what character changes that we need to take place in our own lives. What we can learn by looking at other belief systems or other cultures, and what we can see in many of the groups that we're going to be dealing with, the simplest way to bringing them to Islam. So we've looked at people from religious backgrounds, we've looked at people who have no religious background, we've looked at people in the music scene, we've looked at people that are in all different walks of life. So we haven't just focused on how to dawah just to Christians, or how to do dawah just to Hindus, or dawah to atheists or agnostics. We've, inshallah, tried to cover as many bases as possible in the shortest amount of time as possible. So today we are going to do one of those little bit of a motivational talks, one of those breaks in between our series. It's every now and then it's good for us to take a time away from the series and have a look at how we are doing. How are you doing as a da'i? Inshallah, over the last few months or the last few weeks, you've been applying some of these ideas into your life. Maybe you have been speaking to some of the Christians in the way that we've suggested. Maybe you went and found one of those gothic guys or one of those metalheads or punks in your community and you went and spoke to them and you found, these things are actually operating, these things are working. So before we move on, we need to have a look at ourselves and see how we can change. Today we're going to be talking about a serious issue, about looking at ourselves. We've looked at culture, how culture can play a very, very large part in whether your message is accepted or rejected, whether they want to listen to you or not. And today we're going to speak about racism. Racism is a big issue even in today's society still. Many people believe that racism, and you'll hear people say this, racism is a pigment of your imagination. By making that statement, you're showing that you have not been freed of racism. To take a term and say racism is a pigment of your imagination is to say there is no racial problem in society. Yes, there is. To wipe it over with some funny little saying is not going to get rid of racism. It's not going to get rid of prejudice. And sometimes we have to look at the difference between racism and prejudice. Some people say, I'm not a racist, I'm prejudiced. That's the same thing. It's like saying racism is a pigment of your imagination. In some countries in the world, we find that racism is practiced under different terms. Maybe they call it law and order, but it's still racism. People are still getting arrested because of the color of their skin. People are still getting minimum salary because of the color of their skin. Some people are getting the good jobs because of the color of their skin. So if we think that racism doesn't exist, then we need to wake up. It's still alive and well on planet Earth. Maybe just hidden better under different terminologies, but it's still there. And it's sad that many times I meet sisters or brothers in Islam who have been Muslims for 10 years, 20 years. They revert to Islam. That means they chose to revert to Islam, made their own decision. And then I speak to them and they say, don't you know a sister that I'm looking for, like to marry? Or the sister will say, don't you know a brother I'm looking to marry? And I say, yes, I know this brother. And they say, no, I'm not looking for that. I want somebody who's in this race group. And they've been a Muslim for 10 years or 15 years and they're still thinking like that. They still say, no, I'm not going to marry because that's not the race group I was hoping you would give me. Can't you see what color I am? And people are still thinking in those terms. So don't think that just because you reverted to Islam, or because you are a Muslim, that you are free of this. In the Muslim community, it still exists. Many countries in the world. Not because of what culture you are, but because of what race you are, the color of your skin. So when we look at this topic, it is a serious topic because we find that many points in history, many countries were divided because of race. South Africa was a classic example. People were segregated because of their races into different parts of the country. they had what they called homelands, or locations, different locations from each other. And you weren't allowed to live mixed. You weren't allowed to do business with each other. You could come and work in an area and then you had to leave. If a white person was found in an area which was predominantly African culture, that white person would be arrested because they were breaking the Group Areas Act. And the same thing would happen if a person was found in a white area. Same thing could happen, vice versa. And my father was a missionary, and so when he was doing missionary work or teaching, often he'd be arrested and put into jail because he was breaking the Group Areas Act at night. This was very confusing in South Africa, and people were divided. In America, they had a wonderful law that protected them from practicing racism. It was called the Jim Crow Law. And Jim Crow Law was a law that started in the late 1800s. And this Jim Crow Law gave the power to separate people because of race. And people were treated like animals. Worse. What we saw in South Africa is nothing to what was happening in the American regime when Jim Crow's law was in place. People were killed, they were dragged behind vehicles, they were lynched, beaten. Terrible things happened to them. In South Africa, at least the world knew what was going on, and the media screamed out against them. Yes, there were people that were killed. Yes, there were people that were tortured. But America did it wholesale, on a massive scale. And we're not saying one is better than the other, but from 1877 until the 1960s, this was a law that was practiced wholeheartedly. There were signs up saying no coloreds, meaning no black people, no Hispanics, no dogs. The same sign. Can you imagine having a sign saying no dogs, no coloreds, no Hispanics? What are you saying? What type of message are you sending to people that you are on the same class as an animal? In South Africa, they would have signs all over saying whites only. They'd have bathrooms, toilets, whatever, saying whites here, blacks here. This is the world that we come from. This is the 1960s. It was still like this in America. It was like this not even 20 years ago in South Africa. So we're not talking like some long, far away past that never happened. It's happened the other day. And it can happen again, and it is happening again. This is why I'm bringing it up, because it's starting all over again. And we thought we were finished with it, but it's starting all over again. In America, the largest group that are incarcerated in jail are from the African community, African American community, colored community, as people would have termed or want to refer to. And these people of color are incarcerated. And people say, oh, well, because they're dealing with drugs, or because they're stealing, or because they're involved in violence. Well, we have to ask, why is this happening? And there is a book that was written by a woman in America, which was called Jim Crow's Law in the Age of Color Blindness, where she deals with this Jim Crow's Law. And she said that even though it was supposed to have ended in the 1960s, it's continuing to this very day. Just got different terms for it. In the world today, we believe, as far as the world is concerned, that there is no such thing as apartheid. That apartheid is dead and gone. South Africa has been freed. And yet, just on the other side of the earth, there's a country that practices free wholesale apartheid. And the world just looks the other way, pretends they don't see. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Palestine. What's happening in Israel. That's wholesale racism, wholesale prejudice, wholesale apartheid. Still alive and living. It's just moved location. And so there are a few individuals in the world, especially in America. There's a man and a wife team who have the Tippett family. That's their surname, Rufus Tippett. And they have started a little organization, small little things. They often say one man can't make a difference. Here's a husband and wife team that made a difference. And they are going to the jails, they're going to these prisons, and they are doing dawah. They're calling people, saying, when you get out of jail, when you get out of incarceration, there is hope, so that you don't have to go back into slavery. Many of these people, did you know that in America, that when you are caught for a crime, maybe you have to feed yourself, and you're caught for a crime and you're imprisoned, many times when you go to court, you can't afford a lawyer. So what do they say? What's that little thing that we always hear? If you can't afford a lawyer will be provided for you. No one told you that you still have to pay for that lawyer. And so what happens is they serve their 5-year prison sentence. And then when they come out, they expect to get some money for the time, doing jobs or work. No, it goes to the lawyer that you got in the beginning. And so you come out of jail in debt. And where do you get money from? Because you can't get a job. Welfare grants won't give you money. And so it's a system of keeping people enslaved. So what do? Commit a crime. Land up back in again. It's a vicious circle. Can never stop. What about the white kid who does the same thing? Well, if he goes to jail, if he ever sees the inside of the jail, when he comes out, he's got a whole community that will back him and support him. This is not what you find with the African American community. People are shunned. People turn against them. We need to take a break. When we get back from the break, we'll continue, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are talking about a very serious issue today, and that's out-and-out racism that has been practiced in the world today, and what we can do as da'is. And I said in the 1870s to the 1960s, in the 1940s through the 1990s, in South Africa, we had out-and-out racism. In America, they had racism. Laws that enforce this. And many people think this is over. And we find that many countries in the world are still practicing slavery. The only thing is they're not treating their slaves correctly. And so we find that in America especially, what's happening is many Christian theologians in the early years, specifically from the Christian community, were teaching that white people were chosen and that the black people were cursed and should be servants to the white superior race. That's what they were teaching in America. That's where they got the idea of Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, from, because they thought they were superior. And today that idea hasn't really changed much. And today the people in America are suffering. But there are millions of people that are being persecuted in America. There are suffering that need our help as Muslims. And the people that need it the most are those from the African American community. They have been rejected, they have been marginalized, and they have been accused of everything. We've spoken about one of the episodes before. If we had to go to a university campus, for example, in Queens, in New York, we had to go to a university there. And we had to go to a university at Oklahoma University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I guarantee there are more searches and more raids at this university yet in Queens than there ever were or ever will be at Oklahoma University in Tulsa, because this is more predominantly European, and this is more predominantly African American and Hispanics and foreigners. Why is that? They say we want to clean the streets of drugs. No, you don't. You want to get free labor. You want to get cheap labor. It's a fact. It is a purposely done racist strategy that is in place. And don't worry, it's not only America. It's happening all over the world. It's not only happening in America. So it's not only I'm pointing there. It happens in Africa. It happens in India. It happens in Pakistan. It happens in Brazil. It happens in France. Happening in Germany. Everywhere in the world it's happening. Maybe it's not black and white. Maybe it's not colored and European. But it's happening. People are being persecuted because of their race, because of another group. In India, it would be more like the caste system. But what can we do? We have to be strong, and we have to support those who are helping fight against the system. You might sit in your country and say, we've got enough problems of our own. If you do not protect your Muslim brothers in another country, why would they support you in your country? I'm talking about supporting the rights of those in other countries that have been marginalized. Where is the world that is speaking out about what is happening in America? Everybody is pretending that it's not happening. As long as it's happening there and it's not happening in my country, I'm fine. As long as they don't come knock on my door and cause problems here. If we allow it to happen in America and it continues, it will happen here. It will happen in your country. It will happen in your neighborhood. You have to stop it. You have to start creating causes that you support and help those people, like Jenny and Rufus Triplett in the States, who are doing this work in the prisons 2 people by themselves. They've been on Dr. Phil and given their story. They've been on the New Housewives of Atlanta, whatever it is, and they've given their story. They're well-known people. So how come we don't know about them? How come the Muslims don't know about them? They are Muslims. Both of them are Muslims, practicing Muslims. And by the way, one of the worst things that it comes across, and you'll have known this, my brother, when you were living in the States, is that anyone of color, in other words, not from the Caucasian community, white community, when you meet them and they're Muslim, what do you say? Are you associated with the Nation of Islam? That is worse than racism as far as I'm concerned. Because you are just stereotyping people. The Nation of Islam is dead and gone. It has a tiny following of a few diehards. But generally speaking, it's something you shouldn't even bring up in a conversation. Those who don't know who the Nation of Islam is, that's good. But don't ever say to someone, oh, are you a part of the Nation of Islam? It's like somebody coming to you and saying, oh, are you Indian? Oh, you're Qadiani. You understand? You would be upset. So you want to make sure that you look past people's skin color. You start thinking outside of that issue. And we need to make sure that people feel inclusive in the community. So as a da'i, when you meet people, you need to reach out to people no matter what their pigmentation is, what income level they have, what status they have, how well known they are. Everybody should be treated the same. Remember I spoke about how one person giving me a $1 check was as much as someone giving me a $10,000 check. They're both equal. Just because this is more in money doesn't mean that this is not the same value. The $1 is worth as much, if not more, than the $10,000. You must treat every human being with love and respect. And it's something you have to train. It's not something that will come normal to some people. You have to work at it. And we have to move into a society where we care and have compassion for all people. And it doesn't become like, oh, they are a different people, and we have to care for them. Mustn't be like that either. You must thinking about people all the same. And equality is not just a term. It's what, remember we said we don't believe in human rights. We believe in human responsibility. We don't believe in equality. We believe in responsibility. So all people, we need to be responsible citizens of this earth. We have to be responsible for each other. Some of us think that, it doesn't affect me. I live in a country where, like maybe you're living in a country like Denmark, or maybe a place like that where you think, oh, well, this is not going to affect me. It will affect you, because if we allow these things to continue, then they'll eventually come and we'll wake up and we go, what happened? As happened in the past. There's a saying that Jim Jones had. Jim Jones was a very bad man. Jim Jones was a man who created a cult that the Christians followed. And he believed himself to be a guru or a god or whatever he was, whatever he wanted to claim himself to be. And thousands of people followed him. We made this oasis. I think it was Ghana, I might be wrong. But he found this place, this little island type place that he made, and everyone went and lived on this kibbutz type of thing. And eventually he made them all commit suicide. Thousands of people committed suicide because of him. And he had a saying though, even though he was a crazy man. He said, those who forget the past are forced to repeat the past. So if you forget where you came from, the chances are you'll repeat the same mistakes again and again and again and again. Don't think that because you have a lovely constitution. South Africa has one of the most wonderful constitutions in the world. If you read the Constitution of South Africa, it's wonderful on paper. In real life, hardly anybody follows that constitution. Rape still happens. Segregation still happens. Sexism still happens. Abuse still happens. On paper, it's wonderful. You have to implement those things into your society. So just because you have a constitution that says you have the right to say whatever you like doesn't mean that you actually can say whatever you like. If that was true, and we're just looking for example, the American Constitution, you say you have the right to freedom of speech. You try to speak freely. See how quickly that works for you. The problem with freedom of speech is that it is in the ear of the beholder. Whoever hears it, it depends on how much he will accept that or not. So this is a big question that's going on in the world today. You know, in Britain, in the UK, they've got a place where people go stand on a little box in the park and they say whatever they like, and everyone comes and listens to what the person is saying. And the people heckle them and scream at them. They come up with anything. People come and talk about aliens, and people talk about little green men, and talk about how we all related to, we were all once, lizards. And we're lizard people. People come up with all sorts of strange things. But you have freedom to be able to do that. Not anymore. Now you can go stand on that box and there are a lot of things you can't say. A lot of those things you can't talk about. So we find that slowly but surely many of our rights are being taken away. And inshallah, in a few episodes from now, we're going to, inshallah, talk about another book that was written by another American woman who gives a doomsday prophecy, in a way. Not that she's prophesying anything, but she gives a doomsday narrative of what's happening in America. And we can look at it and we can go, oh well, that's happening in America. But like we said, if it happens there, it will happen here. It will happen in your home. It will happen in your area. Fantastic book, Naomi Watts. So those of you who want to find out, go read her book. Get her book. You must have it in your home. Just like you should have this book that I spoke about today, about the Jim Crow law. That's a book that you need to have in your home as well. As a da'i, you need to have books on economics, you need to have books on politics, you need to know what's going on in the world. Not just what's wrong with Christianity. There's a lot wrong with the world. There's a lot of work that you need to do. So you need to find out, if you didn't know about Jim Crow's law, today you do. Today the whole world has been exposed to Jim Crow's law. So don't sit in the darkness, get into the light. It's Islamic literature, Islamic knowledge, as well as secular knowledge. Well, that's all the time we have for today, so make sure you join us again. Same place, same time. So for me, Areeb Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.